Hello, everyone. Today I'm here with a very special guest. He is a California State University graduate, and he's been working for years with all things awesome. He now currently works at Super7 as an associate art director with a bunch of properties, including Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and of course, Godzilla. Kyle Wlodyga, welcome to the channel.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Congratulations on saying the name correctly the first try. Pretty good. I liked that there was no hesitation. I sensed that there may have been some rehearsals involved. That was well done. That's it. You're on the list of people I can count basically on one hand who have said it correctly on the first try. So good job.
Yeah, well, the key was to say it with confidence, I think.
That's right.
If I become scared of it, then I will mess it up.
That's true. It's like you have to accelerate to turn on a jet ski. It's counterintuitive.
Exactly. Today is so fitting because Super7's slogan is, "Nobody made the toys that we wanted, so we made them ourselves." And as someone who has watched all of your interviews, I can say no one has made the interviews that I've wanted to watch as a diehard Toho and Godzilla fan. And so I am super excited to be here with you and to ask you all about what it's like to work on Toho and Godzilla, because that is so rad.
Yeah. It's a privilege, and I know that it's definitely something very special, because obviously Godzilla means a lot to me, and means a lot to everybody at the company. Specifically, I can only speak to my own experience. I know how awesome it is and it feels to get to work on that kind of stuff. And congrats on watching all of my interviews. Also, I'm sorry, I guess. What I will say is that even my own girlfriend of 7 years has not watched all of my interviews. So you're doing good. You free later? Is that what's going on? I don't know.
Yeah, a tale of two Kyles.
That's right. That's right. Across the North American continent.
Yes, a romance spanning across time zones. So there's a lot about Godzilla to talk about, but before we get to that, I'd love to hear more about the artist behind the art.
Sure.
And so I was wondering, could you share a little bit about your history in the toy industry and how you came to actually work at Super7?
Yeah. So I've been in the toy industry for about 8 or 9 years now. I started freelancing way back in 2015. So very quick overview of it is, I went to college, Cal State University, Fullerton, which had a really good illustration program. And I studied illustration with a minor in entrepreneurship and business administration. And at that time, I wanted to do comic book art, specifically comic book covers. And then I quickly realized, after working at a comic book studio for a few years, that you make no money and it's a lot of work. So I wanted to do something else. While I was in college, I had interned for a place called Cryptozoic Entertainment through some mutual connections and stuff. And they're mostly a card game company. And so when I interned for them, that's what I was working on, was card games, online TCGs, trading card sets, that kind of stuff. And while I was there, I just networked and met with other people, and one of those connections was this guy named Jeff Parker, who was starting the budding, fledgling, infant version of the collectibles department at Cryptozoic Entertainment. And I had worked at Cryptozoic again on and off for a couple of contracts for years after college. And on my last one, I met Jeff. And then the day after that contract ended, Jeff took me to lunch and we started working together, because he was working on collectibles, specifically DC and the DC Bombshells license, which was pretty big, right around 2015, 2017. And so my first gig was doing color concepts for those figures back in 2015. That was all freelance, work from home, that kind of stuff. And then I kept getting steady work for 6 to 10 months or so, and then eventually they started bringing me in for box mock-ups for planograms, which is if anybody knows what a planogram is, it's basically a false storefront inside of the headquarters of any major retailer. Like Walmart has a fake Walmart inside of Walmart so that they can plan where stuff goes across every single Walmart across the country. And typically you just send product to those companies so that they can plan where it goes. But if you don't have products and they need to know how big it is, you have to make fake examples of that. So I was making fake boxes to send to storefronts for major retailers so they can start planning them. And I was doing that for like basically 3 months part-time, and then they decided they had enough work and they pulled me in full-time. And so I was working full-time at Cryptozoic Entertainment, and that was like March of 2016, I think. So yeah, it was a good time, and it taught me a lot about just the intricacies and ins and outs and that kind of stuff of toy design. And then eventually Jeff, who was my boss there, left, and there was no one really left to pick up the pieces, and so I just kind of took over and just kept going. And so I ran that department for about a year and a half, 2 years, and then layoffs happen. It's just reality of life. And so I moved on from Cryptozoic, and the way I ended up at Super7 was kind of just a cold application, sort of, kind of. While I was working at Cryptozoic, I met up with this guy named Daniel Pickett, who runs Action Figure Insider. Great guy, legend in the industry. If you don't follow Daniel on socials, you should. Action Figure Insider, he's a great guy. And he knew I was looking for work, and he messaged me and said, "Hey man, did you know that Super7's looking for designers?" And I was like, "I did not." And so I applied, and he put in a good word for me with Flynn. And yeah, I actually, my first my interview with Super7 was at DesignerCon 2018 in person, which was pretty cool. So from there, I did my interview. I think you obviously know this story, but I'm just doing it for your friends here. And then did a design test, and I passed, I guess. And then moved into the Bay in February of 2019. And it's been at Super7 ever since. So
yeah, that's super cool. And you never know where life's gonna take you with these different opportunities.
Yeah.
Like, who would have known, working on those planograms and stuff, that just a few years down the line you get to work on all the licenses that you grew up with. That's so wild to me.
Yeah.
And
it's wild to you, sir. I'm the one who was living. It's pretty wild, trust me.
So you mentioned that you originally hoped to become a comic book artist before realizing not a whole lot of money, not very sustainable. And I was just curious, in your current position at Super7, are you able to live some of those dreams of being a comic book artist through the work that you do? And I'm just kind of curious, what kind of comic book-y art do you get to do through your job at Super7?
Well, a lot of my concept drawings, I still use a lot of the same techniques I did before, because the way that I like to render my illustrations, it's very similar to comic book coloring. It's very fast, even though I'm pretty slow at it. And it's I do a lot of heavy ink line and hatching as necessary, but then it's a lot of flat colors, and then you do selections and Gradients and that kind of stuff for feathered and airbrush kind of looks and stuff. For certain things in work, I try not to get too flowery or detailed with it, I guess you could say, especially for timelines and deadlines and stuff. But if I know that I'm particularly proud of something and I know it's going to eventually go into the portfolio, I'll submit the thing to the licensor for work or for my deadline, but then on my own time I'll take some extra time and kind of spice it up and make it look prettier so I can put it in the portfolio. So
cool.
That's not exactly comic booky, but it's definitely
no, but you get the flavor. You get the flavor of it. No, that's always cool. That you get when you get to do the thing that you would hope that you got to do.
Yeah.
Here and there. It's really great to find those opportunities. Now, Godzilla is not the only property in your wheelhouse. In fact, I think you've got probably in the double digits now at this point. Approaching.
Yeah, I think so. I think I hit double digits in the first year that I worked at Super7, which was pretty wild.
Okay. All right.
Because I think, at Cryptozoic, I worked on 3 to 5, not including in-house brands that we developed, in-house IPs. And then it was something triple that when I got to Super7, just because I started working on reaction figures. They didn't let me get into Ultimates till I was really annoying about it. So that was it was cool because reaction, you know, it's either one figure or it's 6 figures, but then you move on and there's a lot of it's fast. So that was very interesting time.
And I know because you work on a different timeline than the customer sees, right? Like right now we're at the end of 2023, but for you, like you're probably thinking what, like early 2025 at this point?
Yeah, pretty much. So
yeah,
because 24 is more or less baked at this point, like nothing really gets added or changed for this year. So
yeah. And like we spoke before on Discord, and I was like, hey man, like did you design that glow in the dark Megalon? And you're like, maybe. I made the regular one, but I don't remember the glow one.
Yeah.
It's just like, what do you mean you don't remember?
I don't, because you do so much. You do so much so quickly, and I had a feeling you would brass out, and I can confirm I didn't design the glow coloration of it, but I did design the like base plastic figure that it's based on. So
yeah. Cool. With all the properties that you're working on, like I'm sure it keeps you very, very busy and kind of on your toes. And I'm just wondering, like, as an associate art director, like what does an average day look like for you?
Sure. You know, first I wake up and I scroll Instagram for, you know, hour and a half while I'm still in bed, and I was like, usually I'll get up around like, you know, 8:39 or whatever. Make my coffee. If I was smart, I had the pre-made version button, like where it can like start on a timer, but most of the time I'm not, and I have to rush to go turn up. But then, you know, you get in there and usually get a good chunk of emails from overseas partners and factories to go through overnight, because they're 15 hours ahead of you. So I'll go through that, click through the emails that they send you, and you know, try and decide what's urgent, what's not urgent, what needs a little bit more time, what can I answer pretty simply then, and try and go through all the quick ones first. Then I will, you know, I'll put aside the ones that I know are going to take a little bit more time, go into our kind of project management software system, look at where every project is that's like at least on my schedule, because, you know, I am a designer, but there's also another designer as well named Mike Gullen, who you may have heard. He works on G.I. Joe specifically and some other stuff as well. But then we also help manage a team of 3 sculptors and 2 painters as well. And so we have to organize what they're doing, make sure that those projects are on track, you know, give any feedback that they may ask for overnight, because a lot of those guys are on East Coast. I know Mike is specifically on East Coast, and I'm on West Coast, so there's a little bit of back and forth there. And you know, once that's all done, it's probably about lunchtime. Come back. I will address the factory inquiries that maybe need a little bit more hand-holding. And then it's usually the last 2 to 3 hours of any day that gets into like actual like design work. So concept arts, color guides, draw overs, art direction, that kind of stuff. And then I'm done. And I feel like I gave like a pretty rigid schedule on that, but like it is so like everything changes every day that it's kind of hard to exactly say specifically. That's just like a, you know, that's the sum of, you know, it'll be 5 years at Super 7 in February. That's like the average mean of whatever 1,800 days is or something like that. That's Super 7.
Yeah, it's like it's a wide net, and we're trying to figure out where the average is. No, I can respect that. I'm sure that there are some days where it's just like all international partners. That's all you're doing is responding to emails.
And it's usually right around December or January, right before Chinese New Year.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Guess everything's got to get out before CNY. Yeah. Every time a new license is added to Super 7's repertoire, you get this new influx of people who are discovering Super 7 for the first time and are not really familiar. And sometimes there are people that are like just really genuinely unfamiliar. Like they see reactions on Target shelves next to Hasbro or Funko or whatever, and you know, maybe they get the sense that like, oh, Super 7 is like this really big company if they're on Target shelves. What is like one of the biggest misconceptions, or maybe one of the most frustrating misconceptions, that you think customers tend to have about Super 7?
That's a very good question. As far as like big misconceptions, I think the biggest one is you nailed it. It's the like, oh, they're a huge company, they can do all these things, and we really aren't. You know, I think there's a very common misconception that I know Flynn deals with it all the time. It's like, oh, why would I pay this much when you can make it for pennies, overseas or whatever? And it's like, you can't really, because if you could, everybody would be doing it. And just because we do have placement in Target or Walmart or whatever, or we work with Disney or Hasbro or whatever, that does not necessarily mean that we have the same means as a Disney or a Hasbro or a Mattel. Our quantities are very, very low still, even now. We're still very much like a boutique collector brand. We are not moving nearly the volume that some of the larger competitors are, just simply because we are pretty small fish. So that factors into price, that factors into distribution models, and that some of that stuff is kind of out of our control. We can absolutely try and make something, and what I would say is we can really only make something at a loss maybe twice, and then it's over. So you have to all of the pricing that I see people struggling with is really it's very much calculated, and there's meetings where people all go over it, and there's algorithms and equations and all that stuff. I have a little bit of that in my background, but there are people who are smarter than me at who do that regularly, who help inform those decisions. So, and I trust them just like they trust me to design the figures and make sure it works correctly too. So, definitely, they're huge. They do all this stuff. We are not. We're very small. So,
right.
The other one I would say is $1 million is less than you think as well.
So. Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I live outside Toronto, which is the biggest housing bubble on the planet, I think. You look at what $1 million house goes for in Toronto, and you're like, there are no windows.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Yeah, it's a sell.
So the way that I've thought about Super 7, at least generally speaking, is if you look at what Bandai does with their movie monster series figures, those are your mass-produced Toho Godzilla figures. And then you look at YMSF. There's this just one guy in a garage who makes really good stuff, really high quality stuff, but it's triple the price.
Yeah.
By the time you can get it into, domestically, by the time you bring it over. And so that's kind of just roughly how I kind of see Super 7 as compared to other brands. It's yeah, there are the big companies, the $1 billion companies making the mass produced stuff because they can move that quantity. They can absorb those costs. But then you have this group of people who, they're not the biggest company, but their heart's in it. They want to make really cool stuff. But it comes at that boutique pricing, right? Yeah. Like you said, you're not making nearly as many units of the things as Hasbro, Mattel. But I was watching Veeb's video with Brian earlier this week, where Brian was talking about, because you know your audience, you know the size, you're able to sell through the stuff that you do make, even if it is a smaller quantity.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there's a lot of we know that audience because we are that audience too. And I think that ties into the manifesto, as they call it.
Among the people who don't really understand what Super 7 does, there is the Godzilla audience. And the Godzilla audience, I think the only thing that all of them can agree on, all of us, I guess we can agree on, is that
dozens
we're
of
a very volatile group. We're very volatile, very emotionally charged kind of group. And sometimes you see when people come out with new products, whether it's Monster Arts, whether it's Bandai, whether it's Super 7, there's always going to be an emotional reaction to the stuff that comes out. And now I want to tie it back to what you were talking about, the interview that you had with Brian at DesignerCon, where Brian actually got to show you some of the in progress Ghost stuff that they were working on. And it wasn't quite up to the level of detail that you were expecting or what you would have wanted. And can you walk through what that was like?
Sure. That's a very it's a very kind way of putting it. So the long and short of it is that I was in my interview with Flynn and Josh, and I was wearing a Ghost shirt, because it's DesignerCon, you just wear your normal clothes. And I'm known in the office and in most circles of oh, that's the guy who wears Ghost shirts, right? That's me. Though I feel like I haven't worn one in a long time. Anyways, but we were talking about, oh, what are you guys doing? What are you excited about coming up next? And oh, we're doing some heavy metal figures. So like Motorhead or like Megadeth or whatever. Remember, this is 2018, so this is before any of the heavy metal reaction things came out.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, really? Metal? Oh, you should consider doing Ghost. Like, Ghost is awesome, man. They're super toyetic. And he's like, they kind of like side-eyed each other, and they're like, we already are. And I was like, oh, cool. Can I see it? And they like reluctantly like showed it to me on their phone. And without even thinking, it's like, it wasn't even like a conscious effort. I wasn't trying to be like, I don't know, can I curse in this,
Yeah, go
interview?
for it.
I was not trying to be a dick at all, but I totally came off dickish. And I was like, well, that's wrong, and that looks bad, and you should fix this. And they were like, okay, nerd, thanks. We'll get right on that. And I was like, oh man, I probably should have not said that. But it ultimately worked out, and one of the first projects I got to do was like fixing that. And there was another instance where we fixed some of the sculpt, but the paint was not adjusted before we showed it at Toy Fair, and I listed out like 5 to 10 things that should be fixed before we show it at Toy Fair, and I was told, we don't really have the time, we don't really have the budget for that right now, we're just going to show it as is. And that happens. I don't blame them for making that decision. That is a very common decision that has to happen just for the sake of time and budgeting. Like, there's so many other factors. At the time, was I upset? Sure. Was I vindicated later? Absolutely, because the licensor saw those images of it at Toy Fair and said, this is absolutely unacceptable. What is wrong with this? You're missing all these things. And it was literally like the same things that I called out. And I was like, ugh.
Yeah. After
that, they sort of just let me do whatever I wanted with Ghost, and it's been fine ever since.
Yeah. So you lost the battle, but you won the war.
I guess that wasn't intentional though. It was just like coincidental vindication. So I guess what I would say to that end is that like I wasn't even actively thinking that I was being antagonistic or like this is bad and you should feel bad about it. My passion took over, and I just wasn't even thinking, because it was just like, of course it needs to look like this. This is what it looks like. And whenever I see, perhaps some of those passionate comments on the internet, that like I understand, because like I am that person, and the way I like to think about it is that they're not even themselves at that point. They're just like blacked out with like Godzilla passion, and that's what's writing the comment. So
yeah, like it's a very emotionally charged response before like the rational person comes through and says, okay, maybe I shouldn't have insulted his mother.
Yeah, well, that's if that's the case, then I would say exercise what I like to call like write it, delete it, write it again. Like get it all out. Then you don't even need to read it. You don't even need to read what you wrote. Just delete it and then do it again, because it'll always come out better. Does anybody have the time or the patience to do that? Most people don't. But in a professional work setting, it sounds like you have a little bit of experience in that too. That is almost always what I do. It's not like every response, that I get enrages me to that degree, but when they do, it's the write it, delete it, write it.
Yeah, no, every once in a while, like I get an email from a student that asks me a question, and I'm like, it's in the syllabus. If you would just read it. So, no, I totally get it. Getting back to Godzilla a little bit, Godzilla has a long history of media. He's got comics, books, movies, obviously. We're now branching into TV shows, not only with, Monarch Legacy of Monsters, but we've got Godzilla Singular Point, which was hit or miss for fans, depending on who you ask. Sure. But just curious to hear from you, like, what are some of your favorite Godzilla stories?
Well, perhaps it's a little bit of recency bias, but I did just see -1 in the theater last week. It's amazing. Everybody's got to go see it. Itching to go see it again. I might go try and see it on Friday. Who knows? -1 is really good. It's probably in the top 5 or 3 movies for me. I really like Shin Godzilla. Before -1, I used to show Shin Godzilla as like the entry level Godzilla movie. Like, if your grandma wanted to try and understand what Godzilla is, you could show her Shin Godzilla and she'd probably get it. That's how I think about it anyways. And let's see. So obviously, like the Dark Horse run of Godzilla comics from the 90s is like very influential to me. You know, the Cliff Notes version of that is my grandfather gave me those comic books when I was like 5 years old, and it is what inspired me to pick up a pencil. So Godzilla has been a big deal to me for a very long time. So that one always sticks with me. And I think a lot of the fun aspects I have with Godzilla are like stories that I kind of make up on my own, be it with drawings that I've done of Godzilla, or I remember specifically like GameCube. There's the Godzilla fighting game. It's like Unleashed Melee or whatever. Like, there's no story to that at all. It's just like you and your friends like just wailing on each other with Godzilla characters, which was always fun. And you know, I of course had the Trendmaster toys, which was a big deal. And weirdly, the other one that sticks with me a lot is my grandfather, same one who gave me the comic books. Used to have a cabin up in the north of Michigan, near Traverse City, Kalkaska, you know, this area. And we only had like a few VHS tapes that we could watch up there. There was no cable or anything like that. The two movies that I watched the most there were Errol Flynn's Robin Hood from like the 50s or whatever, and then from roughly the same time period, Godzilla versus the Sea Monster, you know, Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. So Ebirah has always been like weirdly like I really like him, even though he's just a big lobster and it's not that special. But he is like, I don't know, there's a nostalgia there for me.
Yeah, Ebirah was my second Godzilla movie when I was, I think, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and so I have that same affinity for Ebirah. Like, I look at now, he's just a big old lobster. Yeah. But no, he's our
lobster.
He's our lobster. Yeah. And the Dark Horse stuff, like, I was really little when that stuff came out, but the comic book cover of Bagora biting Godzilla's fist. Yeah, like, that is so iconic to me. Like, when my wife got me the Dark Horse Godzilla, like, one of the first things I did was I took the NECA Otachi from Pacific Rim.
Oh, cool.
And I recreated that image, and I took a photo of it. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. Yeah. This is so cool. And actually, it was funny when I watched Speaky Geeky's video with you shortly after Wave 1 was revealed. He was asking you about like some of your favorite stuff that you want to get to, and you were like, well, there's this one monster I feel like nobody really talks about. And I was like, oh, he's going to say Bagora. He's going to say Bagora. And you're like, he's a giant bat. And I was like, oh, it's Bagora. Absolutely.
Yeah. I would still want to get to Bagora. I think that he deserves figural treatment. I know that, you know, some of our passionate friends on the Discord are convinced that, you know, Baggin and Super Godzilla are coming. Yeah. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But, you know, I feel like Bagora is equally like ignored in terms of figural representation as much as those guys are. So there's a list.
I don't remember like many of the kaiju after Bagora and Cybersaur. Like
those were the two big ones, because then he fought the all tarantula, which is like ridiculous and should probably get a figure at some point. But it's basically like robot Kumanga. Right. Yes,
like Mecha Kumonga.
Yeah, and then he fights aliens, like humanoid green aliens, in that arc. And I think it only went for like 10 issues or something like that before they went to a different series. But,
well, they're reissuing the Marvel Godzilla as like a collection, and I'm hoping that Dark Horse will do something similar, because it would be so cool to revisit that.
Honestly, yeah, I don't know what they're doing, but
yeah, Bagora is probably safer to release as a reaction before an Ultimate, and if we want Ultimate Bagora, gotta buy the reaction.
That's correct.
Same with Baggin. So you know, get
That's
on
right.
it.
Yeah, if you see reaction, Baggin, don't be upset that it's not an Ultimate. Show that you want an Ultimate.
Yeah.
Vote it with your $1.
So you've worked with Toho, the license, now since I think roughly beginning of 2021. That's when the announcement came out.
Yes. I don't remember what the time jump was between announcement of the license and the first product hitting. Do you remember?
So the first product was the Shogun reaction, which I think Brian said you had actually done work on, because he thought that the license would have been secured earlier. So you
true.
Had the
that's actually correct. That's very true. One one of the first things I did in that like first month or two was like a quick guide on how the tongue mechanism should work. Isn't like, and what's funny about that is that I did it completely wrong. It's like not even remotely what was actually produced, but I got to do it, and it was like Godzilla, so that was cool. But yeah, so we actually had the like, because for that Shogun reaction figure, because Flynn loves Shogun, we either bought another one or he just sacrificed one of the 15 of them that he has, and we sent it to the factory and like sprayed it. They sprayed it gray, and then they like 3D scanned it and then cleaned it up and all that. So it's like an actual Shogun Godzilla that we modified or like scanned and adjusted, and that 3D output from the factory was like, we got all the way to like output, like we were ready to tool it, and then the deal didn't happen. And so like, we're like, oh, what do we do with it? And Flynn was like, I know what we do with it. And he took it and he like put it in his case with all of his other Sufumi. And so it was in there for like 2 or 3 years before the deal actually came through again. And so I think that's why we were able to go so fast with it, because we basically had done all that work ahead of time. So it's like he knew that we were going to get it eventually, and I was just hopeful. So
he manifested it. He put it out there, and it happened.
I mean, I've said it before, but he's been wanting to make Godzilla figures longer than I've been alive. So it's, I have my opinions of it, and I have, the flavor that I can add to it. But like, again, at the same time, like Flynn is an amazing collaborative partner, but he also signs the checks, and he loves Godzilla more than anybody I know. So he makes a lot more of the decisions around here. So
you've worked with the license for a couple of years now. There are long-standing rumors within the community that Toho is like super strict with their license, like they don't allow Showa figures, that they're in this weird relationship with Bandai, where Bandai gets to decide what other companies get to make. And just to like set the record straight, how much leeway do you have with your character selection, and like what does the approval process look like with Toho?
Honestly, it's pretty standard compared to other like approval processes. Usually we have an idea of like what we want to do. We send them what's known as a line list that shows, hey, it's these things, and they say yay or nay, or they have their inputs. I actually think that they've been a lot more lenient than they have been in the past, specifically with us. I don't think that the 1200 degree Celsius Godzilla Ultimate would have been done, 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, or whatever, by anybody else. I don't think they would let anybody do that kind of stuff. Or even the skeleton Godzilla reaction figure that just came out. Like, I've seen some other minor like licensees or licensors do that, but they're all overseas licensors. No domestic licensors or licensees have done like a skeleton Godzilla except us. Right. Maybe I'm doing it. Maybe I'm wrong in that. I'm sure there's fact checking coming our way in the comment section, but I think that they've been very cool with like some of the ideas that we wanted to do, like the Dark Horse Godzilla, like the 1200 degree Godzilla, like the skeleton Godzilla, and even going into like reaction stuff too. Like, we announced it already, but like 57 Mogura, like that's ridiculous. Who wants that besides everybody, and nobody else has made it. So and they're very cool with it. So as long as it's like within their power to license it, like they usually don't say no to us. And as far as I know, Bandai has no say, because Toho owns Godzilla, not Bandai, as I understand it. Again, this is my experience. So yeah, and the 57 Mogura, I think, is like one of the big counterpoints to the whole like Toho mandates what gets made. Because it's like, Toho's telling them they got to make this, and it's like, you're telling me Toho said Super7 make 57 Mogura? Like, are you serious? No. What? If anything, Toho was like, are you sure? Like, you want to make that one? Same thing with when we did the first wave of reaction figures and we did 57 Godzilla. Nobody knows what that suit is from. Yeah, like it caught me off guard. Flynn had to explain it to me. I had no idea. I was like, "You mean 55, right?" He goes, "No, 57." I was like, "You mean 50? Like, you mean 62?" He goes, "No, 57." I was like, "Okay, like take me there, like show me," because I'm 90% sure that there is no 57 Godzilla. What I will say is, before we put out a reaction figure of 57 Godzilla, Googling 57 Godzilla would get you, did you mean 55 Godzilla?
Yeah.
That's not, nobody knew what that was.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. That's so funny. Cool. So jumping into reaction as one of many lines that Toho is currently occupying, you yourself have designed the first 5 waves of reaction. And that does not include some of the vintage recolors that were recently seen. And I believe it does not include the upcoming blind boxes. We know there's a black and white one coming, and we know that there's a Shogun Warriors series coming of blind boxes. It got leaked on Big Bad Toy Store. They put up the listings early.
Okay.
So you did the first five waves.
Yes, I did.
Right. And so Minya was put into wave 3.
Yes.
But you look pained to talk about.
Oh, you know this story already, huh? You're trying to get me to tell it.
Yeah, so Minya's wave 3, but you shared that you actually designed him first just to kind of get him out of the way and get him over with.
Correct.
And so I'm kind of curious, like, what does your workflow look like? Or I guess, what did it look like? Because you're no longer on the reaction stuff.
I'm not.
But what did it...
No.
Right, so what did it look like for the order of figures that you were making? If Minya's was done first, but we didn't see him till wave 3, like, what order did you work on these guys?
Other than Minya, I basically worked on them, like, in order. And it's not, like, not to say, like, alphabetical or whatever. It was, like I said, Flynn's been planning the Godzilla license for longer than I've been alive. And so when the license finally went through or whatever, he sent me a Excel doc that was like, here's the next 15 years of Godzilla. And I was like, great, I don't have to think about it. Awesome. And I agreed with all of his choices. So that was very exciting. It would have been one thing if it was like 15 years of Godzilla and they're all Minyas. And you're like, no. But what's funny to me about this Minya discussion is that, like, Flynn has, like, in our internal meetings, Flynn has, like, doubled down about how much he loves Minya. And I know for a fact that that's not true. Like, I know that Hedera is, like, is probably his favorite Toho character. What's funny is that he's doing it because he's messing with me. Like, he knows how much I hate Minya, and so he's just, like, twisting the knife a little bit more just to really it's funny. Because, again, I don't think he ever cared about Minya, like, ever, and he probably still doesn't, but he likes Minya. He likes Minya just fine. Minya's great, everybody. Please buy Minya. He's awesome. But he's clearly just, like, leaning into it to, like, get to me, which is funny because it's working. But so I did Minya first just to get him out of the way because I really didn't want to draw him. And so, hilariously, Flynn was like, why'd you draw him? I was like, he was first in the list. He goes, no, he's not. He moved to wave 3. I was like, I feel like he did that on purpose. But yeah, so after that, it was really just like, okay, yeah, I think for wave 1, I worked on Godzilla specifically first because you kind of have to get him right first, and then the others sort of fall into place there. And because it was like a new reaction line, Godzilla had never been done in, like, that scale before, at least not from us. There was a little bit more back and forth about, like, what it could look like, how it should function. Like, originally I had a very long, like, an accurate length tail on there, but then the discussion was like, it doesn't really feel like reaction. Like, how would Ken, like, the guiding light is always like, how would Kenner have done it? What were the limitations back then? What were the cost limitations back then? Did they think that kids cared about accuracy? No, not really. It was just as long as it was a fun toy and it fit within the scale. So that's where the shortened tails came in and the, like, more upright posture. Like, originally I had 54, like, way more forward because he's kind of got that, like, leaning over posture a lot. And he was a lot spikier. And so it was a lot of, like, I basically, like, drew. It's like that meme. It's like, draw a horse, now erase the parts and you get a perfect circle or whatever. It was like, I drew like a pretty accurate 54 and then it was simplifying and, like, adjusting from there. And once we kind of figured out what that was going to look like, the others just sort of fell in line because, like, Rodan's pretty easy after that. 57 is just a reissue of 54 with a new head, so on and so forth. Like, Mothra is pretty easy to figure out just because he's, if Rodan is wings up, vertical with wings, Mothra is horizontal with wings, like that kind of stuff. So, and then Jet Jaguar, like, of course, he's basically a human, so that took almost no
very familiar territory.
Yeah, no real thinking on that one, that kind of stuff. And then it got a little bit more complicated when we get into like Wave 2, which has specifically Hedorah and Ghidorah were like a lot harder to do. But I think it's pretty obvious to when you like look at those sculpts that we had like a pretty big like Sofubi influence on those two.
Yes.
We went back and forth a lot about whether or not Hedorah should have had like a head joint. And ultimately it felt weird to like have like a little like pinch where the joints go and stuff, and it just felt better to have like what we call the Chewbacca style torso, where it's just like one solid thing, no neck turn. And then Ghidorah was like, I think he's either like, I think it was influenced either by like a Marmot or a Marusan Ghidorah. I can't remember exactly. I can picture it in my head. But it's actually one that has like all three heads on one swivel.
Yes, I know exactly which one you're referring to.
Like, it's cool for that, but it felt kind of bogus for me, so that's why we did the 3 individual swivels on that one. And, but then like Gigan, Megalon, all those guys sort of follow that 54 format from Reaction, and it just sort of fell into place after that. So, and I think that's probably why Minya maybe has a little bit more of like a forward posture, just because he like was designed first before we really figured out like, oh, they're still gonna be like very upright. His tail's even like a little bit longer than like the Godzillas. He's close, but he's close, but he's not like 100% accurate to the other ones, which is interesting to think about. So
yeah, I would say like the Sofubi influence really comes through when you see the glow versions. When you see the glow versions, you're like, yeah, that's a little Sofubi on my shelf.
Yeah, and then there's the the toy recolor ones that we did recently that like hammer that point even harder into your brain.
Yeah.
So glad it worked out.
I would say like the reactions have been really getting better with each series. Like you can see how like that experience, that style of 54 has really paved the way, because like I've seen folks online who aren't really into the reaction stuff. That Megalon got shown off and people are like, oh well, I need the Megalon. Like the Megalon looks super cool. Or the Bullmark Gigan colored the Bullmark Gigan recolor. Like I've seen like the coldest Grinch on Toho Kingdom who does not like reaction, says they're overpriced Happy Meal toys. He looks at the Gigan Bullmark and he's like, okay, if I see that, I'll pick it up.
So, I love that thing. Yeah. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, my hope is for a fully translucent Gigan so that we can see the inverted crucifix.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I hope that made that. I'll have to pop one out. I'm just believing that it did at this point. So
yeah,
that is a deep cut. No, so we'll see. Let's save that surprise for the clear one.
Recently, we saw Wave 4 of Reaction pop up on Big Bad Toy Store, and among them was Anguirus 55.
Yes.
And people were quick to observe that the card art on the 55 more closely resembled the 1968 version than 55. And so I was just curious, like, from your perspective, are we just seeing what a Reaction stylized 55 looks like, or do you think that there was some sort of mix-up with the card art?
I think the real answer is that the card art and the packaging team is a separate entity from design, and they don't always speak to each other. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And the card art is done by a freelancer who's not in-house or whatever. I also had not seen that until the day it debuted, and I was like, oh yeah, that's not right. And miscommunications happen. What I probably should say is that it is just a stylized Reaction version of whatever. So I mean, it's ultimately, we're humans. We try and correct and do the best that we can. What I will say is that I have told the packaging team and the creative director of packaging that is different, but at the same time it's also approved, so how much can you really do at the same time?
So Toho said looks good.
Yep.
All right. Who are we to go against Toho?
And, I don't like to throw anybody under the bus, particularly licensors. But if it's approved, it's approved.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and to be honest, like there's like diehard Godzilla fans, but I think someone who grew up with Godzilla walking by in Target.
Oh yeah,
say,
Anguirus.
Hey,
that's cool.
That's Anguirus. Yeah, that cool. Let me buy it.
If they even know who Anguirus is, because our boy does not get enough shine.
No, that's definitely true.
Other than Singular Point, his last appearance was becoming a soccer ball for Final Wars. So,
yeah. Moving on, we got Super Cyborg. Now, Super Cyborg we can talk about briefly because the Super Cyborg Mechagodzilla was revealed early 2022. Mm-hmm. Here we are, nearly 2 years later. It's just about to land.
Yep.
And we're just about to get our hands on it. And I'm curious, I know Mondo worked on it, but did you do any work on the Super Cyborg?
Yeah, so Mondo unfortunately is not with the company anymore, but he did a lot of great work on that figure, and it was so he designed it, but then it was sculpted by a guy named Dave White, who is on our sculpt team. So I picked up once Mondo left and worked on the Mechagodzilla. Mostly what I did at that point was like QC checks and like making sure the joints work okay and the paint is correct and so on and so forth. And I've done some other colorways of it as well that are coming down the line eventually. So that's kind of my involvement with that particular Toho Cyborg. I may or may not have done some other ones that have not come out yet. So.
Yeah, I think Toy Collector Magazine said like you can look forward to other monsters joining the line. Didn't say who, it didn't specify who, but always cool to see. In terms of colorways, now I've heard Brian talk about how the Super Cyborg stuff seems to be really, really popular with the folks that like to collect Japanese inspired toys. Like they might even know who the character is, but they're just like, that looks awesome, I want it on my shelf. And so I've seen like so many repaints. Like I think Optimus is on like his 5th or 6th at this point.
Yeah, that's right. I'm looking up there because I have all my Optimuses.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Great.
I think you're right.
Soundwave, I think he's on his 3rd one. He's got
Sound Blaster. 3. Sound Blaster and then Clear. Yeah.
Yeah. So with Mechagodzilla, and maybe you've already done this, but like, is there a colorway that you personally would love to see for the figure?
For that one. I mean, the clear one, for whatever reason, I really gravitate towards the clear ones. Just something about like just that like crystal clear plastic, and you can see all the stuff inside is like pretty incredible. So like those are the ones that I like to get. But I mean, it seems like it went over pretty well in the blind box series, but I feel like just a black one with the silver, like the Shadow Mechagodzilla, but but in cyborg scale would be pretty rad. So I would like to do other Mechagodzillas as well. I feel like a Kiryu's Super Cyborg is like a must have. So
buddy, like because he's built around Godzilla's skeleton, like there's so much room. Like as a fan, I'm just like I'm gushing over it, but I'm sure like even as an artist, like even being able to draw out what could this look like, I bet that's got to be satisfying.
Well, because you only ever see like the teeth and like the jaws on like the inside. So like, but if you can take the whole chest off and see like how the ribs are like integrated with like the robo parts and stuff, like, that'd be pretty sick. Yeah.
Moving on to Super Shogun. So you talked about how for the Godzilla you had to send one off, sacrifice it, paint it gray, black dots. Did you have to do that with a Rodan?
No, because they are so incredibly rare that we couldn't do that if we wanted to. Because I think Flynn has one that's like complete or whatever, but it's, we're not allowed to talk about how much it is worth because it's crazy. And so, we're not going to sacrifice that or whatever. Like he was able to take really good reference photos, and we found some additional reference photos, and we just worked off of that for that sculpt.
When I saw that, I was like, at what cost? What did you do to the big one?
No, we're not monsters. We're We have some limits here. We're not gonna
Right.
defile toy history.
Now, the Super Shogun Mecha Godzilla. We
Mm-hmm.
saw it last year for the first time. It's now just recently arrived at the ports.
Mm-hmm.
It is sold through on Super7's website. It's gone, sold through. Did you clarify? You didn't actually work on this one, right? The
So
Super 7
very
Mecha Godzilla.
similar to the Super Cyborg. Mondo designed that one. David sculpted that one. Mondo's no longer with the company anymore. I took over to see it over the finish line. So
Gotcha.
I was, I got some early samples. Checking that colors are right or whatever. A big thing that I was able to do is that the hand mechanism, the missiles were not firing correctly. And I have both they're up here. I have the prototype white Boba Fett, the black Shadow Trooper, and then the dead Optimus Super Shoguns. And I use those as reference. And there was I had never worked on Shoguns before that, and I've done a couple since that may or may not come out. Who knows? There was a little bit of a learning curve of trying to figure out some of that older toy engineering. There's some really great resources online. I think it's like shogunmechanics.com or something like that. Shows all of the workings of like those vintage Shogun warrior toys, and they even like make kits that help you fix broken ones. So like if your Godzilla tail breaks or the lever snaps off or whatever, they make replacements that can help preserve the toy and make it last longer. But those are invaluable resources for how those mechanisms work, and it's like a crash course in engineering, which I was not prepared for. But the way that the factory had manufactured the hand, there was not space for the trigger mechanism to move in the hand.
Oh, like not enough clearance.
Yeah, so basically I had to figure out how that happened, why it's like that, and then where to remove plastic so that it can move correctly and fire, because you could like the first version of the hand, you could put the missiles in there, but if you looked at it funny, it would shoot out and like hit you in the eye. Like it was not locking in correctly. And that's because there was no space for that trigger to like move down and like catch on the like lip of the missile and stuff. So there was a little bit of like detective work there and like cracking open of pieces. But after that, managed to get it to work and finally got to ship out. So that's like a glimpse into a lot of the like sort of what I call them like catch up projects, where it's like somebody else started this and they hand off the baton and then you have to take it over the finish line. So
right. Yeah, it's continuity, right? And that exists in every company. You're going to join projects that have already been going, and you'll exit projects that go on without you. It's just kind of a fact of life.
Exactly. Yeah. It'll happen to me too someday. Who knows?
Nah, you're gonna be there forever, Kyle. Come on.
We'll see about that.
Unless Ghost personally invites you to be their groupie.
They don't need toys. They're good. They don't need me.
Jumping into Ultimates.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure many people are really interested to learn more about. So across multiple Ultimates lines, you've got different aesthetics. You've got Silverhawks and Transformers that are really trying to go for that show accuracy aesthetic, whereas you have something like TMNT, which is really trying to evoke the vintage toy, the feelings of having those vintage toys. When it comes to Toho Ultimates, what would you say the goal is for the figures that you're making?
On paper, it starts with like, we want to make accurate toys to the movies, to the shows, to whatever version we're doing. I think as you work on a brand, as you work with figures, like that sort of changes and evolves as you start to like get to have them in hand and start figuring out what the line really is. So I feel like for me it is like trying to be as accurate as possible. I realize that people think that we do stuff that's cartoony or whatever, but that could just be limitations of the factories that we're using. We're trying to make it correct, but it's early on, so maybe we're stumbling a little bit. And I think you've seen it, but we've tried to incorporate feedback into making it like correct as we're moving forward into more lines. But ultimately, like we want to make it accurate, but not at the expense of it not being fun. Because if it's accurate, but it doesn't you can't really like pose it the way you want it to, or it's like it doesn't move as well, like then is it really kind of worth it? Like, we're still a toy
Mhm.
company. It should still feel fun
Yeah.
while also still like invoking that character. And I realize that I can already hear the keyboards clacking away of like those two things are at odds, but like there is a balance that you have to try and
Yeah.
strike where of being accurate to the character so that it gets approved by the licensor, but it also needs to be fun and functional and worth the money. So
Right.
I've seen a lot of the comments about like, oh, Destroyer is so skinny, and it's like, yeah, that's true, but it's also a toy, and you have to make those cuts so it can move correctly. I think one of the bigger complaints that I've seen about competitive products of that same character is that it doesn't really move all
Yeah.
that well.
Yeah. That's what I was gonna say. Like, if you wanted a Destoroyah that can walk off the screen, it couldn't walk off the screen because it would be too bulky. Like,
Yeah,
it
and
literally would not be
the
able to
materials
move.
aren't foam rubber like that suit was. Like
Exactly.
they don't move.
Exactly. I've seen the comments about the skinny Destoroyah.
Mhm.
Like, I'm all for having a Destoroyah that can actually move. Um, and in some ways, like, a Destoroyah that can actually move is like scarier to me in a cool way. Like, a Destoroyah that can actually like
Yeah.
move and animate.
Mhm.
Like, that's cool to me, and it offers something different than, like, let's say a Monster Arts, or
Yeah.
if Haya eventually gets to a Destoroyah. I had heard whispers, and I'm trying to give people credit. They said that somebody in Super 7, either you or Brian, nobody's willing to tell me who, said that Super 7 was trying to be the American equivalent of SH Monster Arts with their line. And when I have pressed people to give me a source, I have not been able, they can't give me anything. So can you clarify, like, are you trying to be like an alternative or a competitor to what Monster Arts is trying to do? Or would you say that you're trying to go for something different?
No, I don't think Flynn would say that. I don't think I have said that. I think of them a lot because I collect a lot of their products and I have a lot of them as reference points. And there's definitely discussions where I'd say like, hey, look, like, the the Monster Arts version of this character came out 10 years ago and there's never been a reissue, and the aftermarket's super high, which to me says that there's a huge demand for it. So if we can do it for, half the aftermarket price or whatever, like, or even less than like original retail, like, we're golden. We're doing great. So I use them and like, because as a reference point of the competitive landscape, because I think that it's foolish not to. If you choose to ignore the competition or or the competitive landscape, then you are like kind of intentionally kind of ostriching and trying to fail, I think. So, I don't think we want to replace anybody. I love those figures. There's a whole audience for it. That line's been around for 15 years or something like that. 10, 15 years. I don't know. But to say that we're trying to replace them is pretty ridiculous, because they're like, Bandai's the third largest toy company in the entire world. There's no possibility of us replacing them at all. So it would be foolish to say that, period.
It also speaks to, like, I can play with my Super 7 figure. Like, I can sit at my desk and fidget with them. My Monster Arts, like, I look at them funny and they pop off. Like, I have my Beast Form Biolante. I love that thing so much. But if I touch it, she just comes apart at the seams.
Yeah.
So, I think, and I've preached that there's room in the market for both of these lines.
Agreed.
I don't know. I think I do know. I think that some people see the Ultimates figures at $85 and they want them to be that hyper accurate SH Monster Arts replacement. And because I think Super 7 gets so close to it that when it's not quite there, it hurts them.
They get more passionate than if
like
it was
what we talked about earlier.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like they get that emotional reaction, like, oh, this is not the thing I wanted.
Yeah.
Ultimates figures usually have an ETA of about like 9 months or so, following the closure of the pre-orders. And I'm just wondering, like, from a very high level, not to get into like trade secrets, nothing like that. From a really high level, like, what does the process look like from concept to getting it in your hands, really?
Yeah. So usually what happens is we get our assignment or whatever, and we say it's gonna be on sale at this date to deliver at this date. and we start working towards that timeline. It's usually about 3 to 4 months ahead of the pre-sale date that we get to start working on it. So you do that, you get that assignment. I start working on the concept art, go through that. How's it going to articulate? What accessories is it going to come with? That kind of stuff. And then that gets, internal approval. Then we submit that to a licensor for approval. It can take anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks for them to approve it. Sometimes it's faster. They come back, they approve it. Then we get into sculpting, which can take 2 to 3 weeks depending on complexity. And that has to get submitted for approval, and then they approve that, and then we do the paint, and paint can take roughly a week or whatever, again depending on complexity. Submit that. We then put together like a packaging. There's, at the same time that's all happening, there's like a packaging design that's simultaneously, again, they're like we're teams that are all making the same product, but we're kind of siloed in that regard. And so then from there we start doing some of the internal renders and writing the marketing copy and that kind of stuff. And if all goes well, we'll be ready to go about 4 months in. After sculpt and paint approval, though, we also simultaneously start putting those files with the factory and start quoting, and we start getting pricing for some of that stuff, and that helps determine the SRPs or what accessories don't make it, if we need to start reducing deco, if accessories need to get cut so it can hit price targets. Then hopefully it solicits, and we solicit well, and we guessed correctly on our our sales projections. And after the numbers come in from that pre-sale period, that's when we start approving quotes based on quantities that are sold and so on and so forth. And then tooling begins, and then the first shots and the deco samples and the pre-production samples and so on and so forth. And every single stage up until basically we do the digital paint, and then licensor doesn't need to see it again until the pre-production stage, where it's like, hey, it's going to look like this, and hey, the packaging is going to look like this. So, but that's 5 or 6 stage gates that add 2 to 3 weeks of time at each one, and that adds up. So that's why the it can vary. And there's also other factors like factory scheduling, and do they have the capacity to even take you on right now, and because they're trying to get out this other wave. There's a lot of factors there that are kind of out of your control, and again, they're ones that are specifically I'm not privy to all of those myself either. There are, like I said, there are people who are smarter than me with finance, with money, who take care of all that stuff too. All I focus on is making sure the figure's correct. So
right. And from your perspective, where do you think figures are most likely to get held up or hung up?
Usually it's factory, scheduling and capacity times, just because there are only so many factories that can do this type of work and do it well. I mean, my LinkedIn and my inbox is inundated probably 20 times a week with new factory contacts. They're like, hey, we want to do this stuff, and it's and you look at it and it's oh, you have no experience in injection molding, but you've done plates before, but you want to make action figures. No, I'm good. So that's why you only really get to use so many of the same factories, because they're the only ones that have the experience in it. And what's interesting about that is that most of the same companies use the same figures. Who make figures use the same factories. Sorry.
Right.
When I was overseas, walking through factories, and I was like, I know who is making that, or I know what that is. You're not supposed to acknowledge it even. It's kind of interesting. So
for customers that look at the price of Ultimates across the board, they see Snarf at $55, they see Wingnut and Screw Loose at $65, they see Godzilla at $85, they see Destoroyah at $110. And some folks might look at these and think why are the prices so different, or why are the sizes so different for the price? What do you think, outside of size, what do you think are some of the hidden costs of making a figure that people might not be privy to?
Deco is a big one. Specifically the more washes you have, the more spray masks you have to make. That kind of stuff can really add up. And another one that's kind of I've touched on it a little bit in the Discord discussions is your assembly costs. Can get pretty high. Specifically, like people were like, "Oh, why do SH Monster Arts? You know, they're whatever. It's $140 for this -1 Godzilla," and it's like, well, that is a brand that is all new tooling. Like that figure's never been done before, and you know, all of those parts have to be kind of hand assembled. There's no like solid pieces. Like they have to pop each single joint together to assemble the figure. It's not like, you know, there's not like a reaction figure. It's like you inject the half of the torso, the back of the torso, and then the legs, and then you shove them all together. Like that assembly cost is like minimal because it's very quick. But if you like, it's the thing that people forget is that these are all hand assembled in factory. So however many 200 parts there are for your -1 Godzilla, like they are hand snapped together, and it takes time. That's expensive. And so it's honestly, it's kind of a miracle that thing is only $140. So, because I have definitely tried to do some stuff where they're like, the assembly cost is too high. We have to do it this way, where they're inset molded or what have you, just to reduce that assembly cost, because it eats up time, it eats up money. And, you know, I think there's been a shift, at least in my head, of like, okay, maybe we don't need all of these hands. Maybe we can take the extra cost that was in those hands or extra hands or whatever, put that into assembly costs, so maybe we can have a different scheme of articulation, or, you know, better deco or what have you. So I think those two specifically add up. I think that soft goods, when they're involved, really adds up as well. Basically, like a cape is like an additional, like it can be like an additional like 10% on top of the cost of the figure, which is like pretty wild if you think about it, because it's just a cape. But you know, granted, we do our capes like wired and double stitched and that kind of stuff, so it can be pretty nice looking. But even so, like soft goods are usually like just additional like cost that you're kind of not anticipating. What I'll say is about soft goods is that they're always more expensive than you think. So
yeah, I believe it, because like Hasbro doesn't do it. Yeah. Like I look at Marvel Legends, it took them like 20 years to get their first soft goods, the trench coat, or not the lab coat for their Beast figure.
Yeah,
it took them like 20 years to do that, right? It's so I totally believe it.
Yeah, I have a friend who works at Hasbro Marvel Legends, and he has told me that a lot of that is specifically the prototyper that they have in house is just not a fan of soft goods too. So that also factors into decisions like that. There is personal preference to a lot of this stuff. You know. I personally do not care for Minya. I hope we never make any more variants of him. But there's clearly people who like Minya.
The point you said, like, you know, maybe we can sacrifice some of the accessories to improve the engineering. Like, I don't know. I made the comment in the Discord. You can always sell accessories later. You can't sell engineering once the figure's in your hand. True. So to me, like, it seems like a worthwhile trade-off if a compromise needs to be made.
True. I mean, that's the hope. But again, at the same time, like, vote with your dollar. If you see that it's, you know, I totally understand the people who want to wait and see. Like, I get it. I do that all the time with figures, because I clearly collect a lot of things. But like, what I will say is that if it is something you want and it is, you know, up to your standards, like, buy it as soon as you can and be vocal about it. There's all these, you know, a lot of people are passionate and vocal on the, you know, dark side of the moon, a little bit more negativity, but you will never hear from the guy who's satisfied with the product that he gets.
Yeah.
You'll hear from the people who absolutely love it and it's their favorite thing ever. And you'll hear from the people who hate it and hate you, and they're going to hunt you down and your whole family. But you never hear the guy who's like, yeah, it was good. I really liked that.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the first videos I did on my channel was on negativity bias. Yeah. And it was like, I showed two videos published at the same time. One was like, this thing's awesome. One was like, this thing sucks. And the one that's like, this thing sucks, 10 times the views. Like, easy. Mm-hmm. It's just people gravitate towards that. And so I'm sure, like, as a business trying to sell stuff, it's difficult to navigate that sometimes.
It can be. And it can be difficult to not take personally sometimes. But it's always a good exercise to try and remind yourself that you are you are not your art is not you, all that kind of stuff. So
When we talked before, you mentioned that Godzilla Jr., Star Falcon, Land Mogera at one point had been considered for accessories to existing figures that have already been solicited.
correct.
And so to get that costing information, to make that call, let's say these are not going to make the cut, how far along do those figures have to be in being produced, I guess, in order to get that information?
Sure, it sort of depends, but usually they have to just get to like 3D file, like they have to be sculpted. So like in the instance of Godzilla Jr., it was suggested that he be the accessory for Destroya, and it was like, okay, Destroya is already like $110. Like, there's no way we're gonna do a whole other figure. Like that's now a $200 set, and would anybody buy that? Probably not. Like we already felt really bad, like pushing it up to 110. Like we felt we were already pushing the envelope there. Godzilla Jr. did not get sculpted. Basically it was like, yeah, no, that's what a nice idea. But I do want to make Godzilla Jr. eventually. I'd love to make a little 3 or 4 pack of like Godzillasaurus, Baby Godzilla, Little Godzilla, Godzilla Jr.
Like an evolution pack.
Mm-hmm.
Toho line features alternate heads with a closed mouth and open mouth version of the characters, as opposed to an articulated jaw, which we're more accustomed to seeing with some of the figures.
Sure.
And I know the decision for this was above your pay grade.
Sure.
But are you able to walk us through maybe that design decision?
Sure. I think part of that was to try and separate ourselves from some of the other products that have been out there. Like your Monster Arts, like your Playmates or whatever. And it also sort of just helps fill out that grid view, that box. Like if you're doing hands and stuff, like the thought is you have the alternate head as well. And most of the time it actually just looks a little bit better because it's cleaner. You don't have to worry about like making gaps and spaces for like the jaw to move. So, I only see benefits, but at the same time, I totally understand wanting articulated jaws if that means like, okay, we don't have to inject the rest of this head. Now we can put that into the engineering. Like I'm starting to not necessarily see the light on it, but I'm understanding the point of view a little bit better now. And what I will say is that we have some figures that we're developing now. I'm not sure where they'll land, when they're gonna be, but we've started experimenting with the articulated jaw aspect. Whether or not that'll actually come to fruition or whatever, not sure. But as of now, we've sculpted it. We're gonna theoretically we're gonna try it, but any number of things can go wrong between now and then.
Sure.
So don't hold me to that. So
sure,
we are listening. We are sometimes trying to improve.
I think it's better to try and for it to not go forward than to not try at all. Because at least then you can say like, "Hey guys, like we're listening. We're trying our best. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't." Yeah, that's the way it goes. One thing I think that would be really cool. I don't know if like I'm not gonna guess what figures you're talking about, but having that point of differentiation, I think that's really important when you have your Haya toys, you have your Monster Arts. But I was thinking like one thing that would be really cool is if whenever you guys get around to doing GMK Godzilla, having him do his like standard articulated jaw, but as a point of differentiation, the moment in the movie when he does his atomic breath for the first time, he turns around, he looks, and he has that snarl, like the furrowed lips, like he's pissed. He's pissed, right? And I think that would be super cool. I think the NECA figure got a little bit of heat because I don't know if I could show it. Like he kind of had a perma snarl kind of baked in.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but like to me, that's like when I think of GMK Goji, I think of the Satsuma sub. He's got to have that, and I think of like that moment when he's just pissed off and he's like, I'm gonna blast the shit out of you.
He's got those demon eyes. He's just mad all the time.
Yeah.
So I totally get it. I have a lot of love for GMK design. It's technically the second SH figure arts I ever got, but it was the first one that I got in this like new round of collecting that I got. Before I only had the Burning Godzilla at one point from a friend who lives in Japan. And then just because I was moving and I needed money or whatever, I sold it, and I totally regret doing that. But then, I started collecting them again about 2 or 3 years ago, and the GMK Heat Ray version was the first one that I got, and I love that design. He's so evil looking. So I'm looking at him right now. This is my Godzilla.
Yeah, you got the shelf up there.
Yeah.
Baragon from that movie, alternate heads, totally on board, right? Like he's got the folded back and he's got the ears. So like I totally see where it makes sense to do alternate heads. But like, you know, I also see like from the playability aspect, like needing to swap heads just to move the piece, like I can see how that gets cumbersome.
Sure.
So it's super cool to see like internally testing some things just to see where does it land, and we will see it kind of with the Wave 3 1200 degrees because he has the skull.
He does. He does technically have an articulated jaw. That's right. I totally forgot about that. You're right.
Yeah,
so,
because the timelines, right?
That's right. What, yeah, that was so long ago. Yeah, totally forgot about that.
First wave Biollante and second wave Super Mechagodzilla, they had ball jointed torsos, whereas Godzilla did not. And seen quite a few folks that are very curious as to how that came to be.
Well, what I will say is that the intention was for them to always have the ball jointed torso. Is that sometimes that gets miscommunicated to factories, and so the execution just becomes different, and time runs out, and eventually you have to just ship stuff out because if you don't deliver, you don't get to make revenue. And you know, as much as it pains me to deliver, you know, an incorrect figure, it ultimately like you do have to like make hard decisions like that. And I still feel like it functions well. It still twists. You can get a little bit of side to side if you like really crank it. But I will say is that we've been paying closer attention to that after that initial thing, and you'll see that Destroya has it as well. So that's going to be a big improvement as well. I promise I'm not trying to make figures that you're disappointed in. I'm just doing it by accident. So,
right. Would you say that like, because you were saying that, like timelines run out and sometimes it's just, you got to get the product out. You know, I had a teacher once that told me that a thing that is 70% of the way there on time is better than something that's 100% too late. Right. And I'm wondering, sorry, I hit the mic. I'm wondering if being a small company who doesn't necessarily have all the funds, that is, you know, very fiscally sensitive, like does that play a role into like deadlines coming and needing to be met?
It absolutely does. Yeah, 100%. Especially with the pre-order model. There's some not collection agencies, what am I trying to think of? Like some ways of paying that like just don't pay you outright until you've like delivered people's pre-orders, which is like is good and it holds you accountable, but it also makes like cash flow kind of an interesting dilemma to try and juggle through. So there are those kind of aspects that you have to really like weigh in on, and it's not just like, oh, we want this one figure to be correct. It's like we can ship this figure that, you know, doesn't have a ball jointed torso, or 25 people can lose their jobs. And it's like, I think we're just gonna ship this figure. So wow. It's not like dire. It's not like that. That's like a very like black and white like example. It's not like that all the time.
Yeah.
But it's just like that. Like I think that partly like factors into that because you don't want to like compile a few of those because things go wrong on figures all the time. Like that is my job, is to deal with the things that are going wrong, and hopefully you know, things get to we can correct them. If we just missed and you know you start shipping a bunch of figures that are like that, eventually you're out of business, and so that's you can't really do that. So
right. And like Brian was talking about the Cobra mothership, he said the tooling estimate on that thing was like approaching $500,000 just the tooling. So like I can totally see how when you get to the scale of like all the lines that you're doing, how, you know, if a few of them start to snowball into issues, like, you know, people's salaries are like what, a fraction of the total cost it takes to get these things out. So you know, you say it's not as stark as that all the time, but like I think it's not hard to see how it could get to that point.
Yeah, it would take more than you think, but it also wouldn't take much.
All right, well let's bring it on back. Let's bring it on back to
more positivity. There we go.
More positivity. tail articulation for Space Godzilla. We saw
Mhm.
the I'm trying to get the, it's not the resin at New York Toy Fair. It's not the resin. What was it?
That
It's
is the tooling output. So that
tooling
is,
output.
yes. So that is basically a 3D print that the factory puts together that they will then use to make the steel molds.
Right.
So
And we saw the tail moving kind of in a way that our current Godzillas are not able to move. It had much more
mhm,
flexibility in
mhm.
the horizontal dimension, for
Sure. Yeah.
lack of a better term.
Yeah. Mhm.
So are you able to speak to what's going on with Space Godzilla's tail articulation scheme?
Sure. I mean, we have it. It is more or less the same kind of articulation scheme that Godzilla had. However, there is increased. There are larger gaps between the tail sections on the inside,
Mhm.
and it is injection. It is inset molded, and that allows for a little bit more range. It also theoretically will also, like, the factory has assured me that it will theoretically have better joint tension over time too, because I know that some people have complained about the tails flopping over time.
Mhm.
So supposedly that'll happen with this one. I have, I've seen that output, but there is like as close as you can only real to me. I feel like you can get like 75% sure that it's going to work at the tooling
Right.
output stage, because there's different tolerances. It weighs a different amount, like in plastic versus the resin that it's printed in.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's like, like I'm not gonna know until I get test shots. And even, but what's frustrating about that is that usually by then it's like too late to change something. So
Right.
there's always like when you get something in plastic that like works, you're like, yes, did it. A little bit of sigh of relief. So it is like a revised articulation scheme. However, it is still kind of similar to what was done with Godzilla. And that specific instance is where I started to really understand, like, oh, like assembly cost is what's really affecting a lot of these costs.
Mhm.
I think in hindsight, I might have foregone some of the crystal accessories to then maybe put that energies into improving the tail. So, live and learn. What I will say is that -1 does have a different articulation scheme. That's why he's so
Mhm.
kind of bare bones on the accessories. In addition to his deco and his crazy spines factoring into
Yeah.
that as well. So so Space Godzilla, I think, will be an improvement. It may not be perfect. It may not be exactly what people are looking for, but it's a step in the right direction, is what I would say.
I'm personally happy with the figures that we've gotten so far.
Mhm.
And to me, like any steps in that right direction are awesome. I'm
Cool.
happy to see them. And also like just learning along the way, right? Like you try a new articulation scheme, see how it lands.
Yep.
I'm patient with it. I know I've had a few people call me like a fanboy or
Hmm.
they're just like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. It's like, no, I'm just patient, man. Like,
Yeah.
speaking of -1, so -1,
Hmm.
it's performing commercially super well. Critics
Yeah.
are loving it, and your figure was debuted on November 29th, and
Right.
it's among the few Super 7 releases with modern tie-ins, right? Like I
Hmm.
think you guys did Lightyear,
Yep.
and there's -1. I cannot think of too many others where it's not like a retro figure. It's look, this is happening right now.
Hmm.
And so I'm very curious to hear, what was it like getting to work on this figure?
It was pretty exciting, actually. Like, we didn't necessarily like get to see it super duper early. Like, I think by the time we received the files for the figure from the movie, the design had been revealed already. So it's not like
Right.
we got to see super secret Godzilla before anybody else. As cool as
Yeah.
that would have been, but it definitely like illuminated some things. Like, you got a little bit better look at like the feet and how those work and stuff. What was interesting about that is that it was given to us in an OBJ file, which is like a high res 3D file. Like, there's a lot of like there's a lot of polygon detail and like points and stuff, and so it's pretty big, but it's very detailed. Think of it as
Mhm.
like a high res PNG, but it's a 3D file. What was interesting about that though is that like it was given to us and it didn't have any eyes, teeth, or claws. Like they just like it was like
Oh,
those were notably absent, and so we then
okay.
had to kind of figure out, oh dang, we should probably sculpt those in, and so we had to figure that out. And that's maybe as a file that got overlooked, maybe they didn't have them, but we figured it out clearly. It was fine. It was just funny. It's like, oh, that seems important, but yeah. So the experience I had with that was just it was not as typical as a normal design process where it's like blank canvas, draw the character, figure out that articulation scheme. It was like, okay, here it is. This is the thing from the movie. So what I did was I took, I pulled it out in ZBrush. I made a few renders, took out screenshots, and then I did drawings of what I felt that the articulation scheme should be and how that
Mhm.
should all be cut up and how it should function. And I worked again with a very talented sculptor named David White, who is amazing, really good. You should follow him on Instagram. His name's Mechazone. He did MMPR, Lord Zed, King Sphinx, Goldar, the Mecha
Okay.
Godzilla, Super Cyborg. Like he really knows what he's doing. And he and I worked pretty closely together about how it should move, how it, where the articulation point should go, the teeth, the claws, that kind of stuff. And then he also had, it's in hindsight, it's a very unenviable task, but it is worthwhile in doing it. He had to figure out how to adjust the scales and the spines and stuff so that they would be reproducible in plastic.
Right.
Because when you are sculpting a figure that's in a movie or whatever, you're not worried about drafting or mold lines or any of that stuff. And so they just went wild with the details, and it was like, okay, let's tweak some of this so it drafts side to side, and we can actually like make this into a toy without 18,000 slides in the mold. And that's the like real unsung hero work of like sculpting toys, is like making sure it's like factory ready. So shout out to David for doing that, because it took him a good long while with all that detail, and he managed to preserve most of it. So very good.
It looks like he's walking off the screen, and it looks fantastic. So in addition to the tail, it looks like there's something new going on with the torso as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a new scheme going on?
There is, and at the neck too. So they are kind of the opposite of what we've done before. Usually there's the ball joint torso and there's the overlay, and the torso moves around inside of it, and there's this overlay here. Whereas now there is the lower torso, and then the top of the torso sits on top of it, and it moves like this.
Okay.
So, same thing going on with the head is the exact same way, because I noted that some people thought that 89 and Dark Horse and stuff was kind of wearing a turtleneck, which totally valid criticism. So luckily enough, people had worded it constructively that I took it to heart, and so the scheme has changed a little bit, just so there's a little bit less turtlenecking, a little less gapping, and slightly better range in that. So
cool.
It's hard to explain without it like in front of me or whatever. But.
Yeah, well, I think it sounds like, if anyone has the NECA stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds very similar to that. Like, I don't know how well this is going to show, but it's very much like that upper piece sits on top and sort of kind of cuffs the bottom half, and allows you to get that that greater coverage, which sounds really cool. We have yet to see any flying monsters in the Ultimates line thus far. There are the classics. We've got Mothra, we've got Rodan, but we've also got some Heisei exclusive characters. We've got Batra's Imago form, and we've got Destoroyah's flying form. And I'm just wondering, like, from a design perspective, like, I've got the NECA Rodan 2019, which I thought it was a pretty cool figure. But these wings, like, you look at them funny, and they just sag. Right? And so I'm just wondering, like, from your perspective, like, how would you want to design a flying character just to try and prevent this issue?
I mean, my initial thought is ratchet joints, but I know that's not, that doesn't sit well with everybody, just because like Mothra is 90% wing, and so there's a lot of weight to that. So I mean that's my initial thought, but I'm wondering if there's maybe like a way to do like a soft ratchet, is my friend Chama calls it that, where it's like it doesn't like click so loud, it just kind of like it's, I don't know, it falls into place weirdly. It's hard to describe. It's a tactile thing that I'm trying to put into verbal. So
I was watching Pixel Dan's video on Wave 8 of TMNT today, and I think that he was showing in the Genghis Frog, I think it was the Genghis Frog, he almost had, it wasn't a hard ratchet, but like you could see the kind of like the little notches, basically like that, for the most part. That's probably how I would want to execute it, especially for a figure that has such heavy wings. So yeah, we'll see. I may or may not have already done that. Guess we'll see. Brian has shared that the plan for Ultimates is to cover Heisei, to dabble a little bit with Millennium, and then eventually go back in time to Showa. And by my count, there's like at least, if we're going 2 characters per wave, there's at least 4 more waves of Heisei, not counting any reissues, variants like 1200 Degrees. And this doesn't even include like rebirth of Mothra characters, which were also during the Heisei era. Like Des Ghidorah, Grand King Ghidorah, Dagara. And so just like from your perspective, I know like you don't get to call the shots, nothing like that, but just as a fan of Godzilla, do you have any words of encouragement for the folks that are waiting patiently for Showa?
Stay strong. You know that we're eventually, you know it's coming. We will get there. And you know, if you need your Showa fix, enjoy some reaction figures, because they're cooler than you think they are, is what I'll say. So
yeah. And if you want Showa Ultimates, buying reactions is the best way to...
That's right.
To move it along.
100%. Vote with your dollar.
I know Trendmasters is very dear to you. And Trendmasters was among, I think, the first domestically available Godzilla product. It ranged from relatively accurate to like super stylized. No idea what they were thinking when they made these. And I'm just wondering, like, if you were Brian Flynn for a day, if you got to call the shots, what kind of Trendmasters homage would you like to make? Would it be like a direct reaction, sort of almost one-to-one, or would you like to do something like TMNT, where it's like, you know, here's an Ultimates version of what that Trendmasters toy looks like?
I think like for us successfully having done the TMNT stuff, it would probably be like the Trendmasters, but now it's fully articulated. So like that weird Gigan that they did, there's something endearing about the like the Biolante that's got the little legs and stuff. It's, I mean, ultimately I probably would be doing way more Trendmasters than we are now if it was me. But I mean, like, number one want is Space Godzilla, you know. Like have it be super accurate, but it's in those movie poster colors. The one Heisei poster that I have, I mean, all of those Heisei posters are amazing. The one that I have in my office is the Space Godzilla one, and it's at the top of the shelf up here. So, always love that guy. And there was like, didn't they do an Anguirus that was like black and purple and stuff? Like, for no reason. Yeah, something like that deserves to have either a reaction or an ultimate recolor.
They did that, and then they did the Anguirus and Kumonga with the battle armor.
Right, yes.
Snap-on armor.
Actually, that's what I would do, the vac metalized battle armor Godzilla. I don't remember if it ever came out or not, but I've seen images of it where it's like you snap on like these vac metal pieces on the Godzilla. It was pretty wild. So I'd be super into that. But I also know that Trendmasters isn't for everybody. So I almost wonder... Like, I go back and I look at what people said about Trendmasters, like, as they were coming out, and I feel like people didn't, like the diehard people didn't really care for them because they were such a departure. Yeah.
But now that we've kind of gone in time, people look back at it and they're like, oh no, like, that was my childhood. I have such nostalgia for that.
They're so rad. Yeah, they're so cool. Still are. Yeah. They're still rad. I still try and, like, if I see one, like specifically the 10-inch ones, if I see one like at a flame, like, I will pick it up. Do I have the space for it? No. But do I have the money for it? No.
The hierarchy of needs, like it's like
Yeah.
2 out of 3, just not working for it.
Yeah.
And then final question: if you were king for the day, you get to make anything you want at Super 7. Doesn't have to be financially viable. It's just like, I want to make a cool toy. Like, I want my supersized vinyl Dorat. I want my Hedera in a slime container. What would you make?
Hedera in a slime container is good. I've brought up supersized Dorats. That's all just stuff that like we're together. I already got to make the Dark Horse Godzilla, which is pretty close to like the dream scenario because I didn't think I would ever get to do that. Trendmaster Space Godzilla recolor, of course, is like top tier for me up there. But in terms of like stuff we don't have yet, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I want to make Metalocalypse toys so bad. I think it's such a great show. It's so toyetic. There's so many amazing characters that deserve action figures, and I feel like we've proven that the music market is out there, and so let's cross over with a little bit of cartoons and get some Metalocalypse figures. I don't know. Just it would be dicey at best, but can you imagine an Ultimates Dr. Roxo? I mean, come on. Just
no, that'd be pretty badass.
Yeah, exactly. So Metalocalypse is my number one right now, and for a while it was Gargoyles, and then our friends at NECA took that away from me. I'm kidding. Yeah. I love you, Randy. I love you, Blaine. Thank you.
It's cool to see like there's not that rivalry, right? Like people like to say like, oh, this blows the NECA out of the water. Or when NECA comes out, say, oh, this blows this other company out of the water. It's like, guys, we're all in the same race, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and we all send each other our own stuff. Like while we were talking, Blaine texted me twice and sent me like 3 memes. Like we're friends. It's not remotely like, you know, like somebody just today was just like, oh, like congrats on the party wagon, man. I think you won the van wars. And I was like, there's a van war? Like what's happening? Like why who cares? Whatever.
Right.
It's fine.
Yeah. Cool. Kyle, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. For the folks who want to keep up with what you're up to or what your work at Super 7 is looking like, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me online at Wlodyga Dude, which is on the screen here, and it's just my last name plus Dude. And I have another account called Kyle of Loot, which is for my toy stuff, but I don't really do that as much. And I'm on Super 7 quite a bit as well, and Facebook and all that fun stuff. You can check me out all there. Mostly Instagram is my big one, so find me there.
Kyle, thank you so much. And to everyone who's watching, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Cool. Thanks, guys.